Hello, Ashley? Hello? Hi.
Hello?
Can you see me?
Oh my gosh, hi!
Hi.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. I am at UCSD right now getting my doctorate in contemporary music.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I had no idea.
Yeah, we're collaborating with Stanford on a project called Reimagining Opera,
Mm-hmm.
and I just got back from Stanford where we were workshopping some new music with the composers there
Cool.
and some of the composers at UCSD. And we're just conducting interviews with famous, relevant people in the field to just kind of ask general questions about opera and contemporary music and what is working and what isn't and your
Then
experience and all
why
that.
did you ask me?
You're super important and so nice, and I knew that you would just be so kind as to do this with me. Let me just make sure that I guess I'm recording. Let me
I think
see.
so. It looks like it's recording.
Yeah, there's a red dot. Um, so you're in Austria right now.
Actually, I'm in Germany, but I'm on the Austrian border.
Ah, okay. And you're
I'm
doing
like a
a
five
concert
minute
tour?
walk from Austria, basically.
Oh, nice. And you're doing a tour? It's like a Christmas tour, is that right?
Yeah, it's a three-concert tour of music by the Monk of Salzburg.
Sweet.
Yeah, and so it's music by the Monk of Salzburg, and then there are some new compositions in the concert tour as well. So it's medieval music and contemporary music.
Oh my gosh, that is amazing.
It's
That
it's
is
very
really
interesting.
that's really cool.
Yeah,
There's
it's a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Well, before I ask you important questions, do you mind if I introduce you for people that will be watching this video?
Oh my God, this is going to be a video that people watch.
Well, tons and tens and tens of people around the world that are interested in this subject.
Oh my God.
You
Okay.
look fantastic. It's most likely just going to be our small group of collaborators, but um, I wanted them to know who you are because you're extremely talented. Obviously, you have like an extraordinary voice and an extraordinary ability, but you're doing so many different things in the field besides just singing. I interviewed a composer, and I'm sure
Mhm.
that her take on everything is going to be very different than yours. So, really briefly, American soprano Christie Finn. Um, you've had a fantastic career in contemporary performance so far and new music theater, which we'll get to the difference between those two in a bit.
Okay.
And you've performed as a soloist with the Asko Schoenberg Ensemble in the Netherlands, the Herzofen Ensemble in Istanbul, Ictus and Nedar in Belgium, Erknal in the Netherlands, Vocal Lab in Amsterdam, and tons of ensembles in New York City. In addition to all of that performing, you are a co-founder and member of the experimental music Noise Bridge. Did I say that correctly?
It's just Noise Bridge.
Oh,
You made it
I
very
thought
fancy,
it was
Ashley.
way fancier.
Hilarious.
So
I
you'll
love
have
it.
to tell me about that because that's a collaboration with Felix, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
So also, you're serving as the managing director on the Hamp Song Foundation.
Yes, indeed.
That is awesome. And also, you are a poet, which I didn't know.
Yeah.
And you have had your text set to music, which is amazing. That's kind of
by
the thing I want to ask you about, if that's okay.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I'm just gonna move over here.
So when you're writing poetry with knowing that it's going to be set to music, what are your considerations? How is it different writing poetry for something that will be set to music versus writing poetry that's just going to stand alone by itself? Or is it different? I have no idea.
For me, it's not different at all. Because I want to write like the truest poetry possible. So I really like, if I'm writing a poem, whether or not it's going to be set to music, I just want to get the poem right. So, and I'm really interested in like formal structures, but I'm also interested in breaking formal structures and having the content relate to the form of the poem. So like I wrote this one poetry cycle that was set at my MSM recital actually years ago. And it was like about a modern day Pierrot character. And I used like 3 very formal structures for poems, including like the sonnet. And then in between those 3, I had 2 free form poems that were like Pierrot's dreams. So the formal poems were like scenes from his life. So like, for instance, the sonnet was the 3rd poem in the 5-poem series. And it was, Pierrot was at the wedding of Columbine, but she was not marrying him. So, sonnets are like love poems. And this was like a thwarted love poem in a way. So, I really like doing things like that. And then, I don't know if you know the composer Matt Elmore, but he's the one who set it for my recital. And he used like the instrumentalists who are my friends so it's like a really weird instrumentation with viola and soprano saxophone and piano and clarinet, obviously, and something else too. I don't remember now. And then me, obviously.
Yeah.
So it was like very unique, the whole situation, which I love.
That's really
that
cool. So when you're like choosing the form of your poetry, it's most often a choice that reflects the drama. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like the story or the content of the poem that I want to include, like what the poem is about. Basically, I try to use, if I'm going to use a form, I want it to have some kind of relationship to the actual content. There's a lot of formal structures like the sonnet are associated with certain themes or with like, certain, I don't know, like repetitive things and content in general, if that makes sense.
Yeah, of course. And so that must be interesting, being writing the words and being the performer. Did you have a lot of say in the setting of the text?
No, not at all.
Did you have anything? No, not at all.
I mean, I think
so you
like
Matt say like the intelligibility. What's that?
Yeah, I mean, Matt is like one of my good friends, and he also really cares about text. So he and I like talked about things as they came up. But I had another composer set one of my poems that was a haiku, and I had already written. He set 2 haikus of mine, and I had already written them before he wanted to set them, so they were kind of like standalone poems. And he didn't ask me about the setting at all, and I like what he did. He like really took them apart and made them very atmospheric, which both of them were. And like, because haikus have a lot to do with scenery and like nature. Like the form of the haiku is usually about something like that. And so it like became this he used it to create atmosphere, like the vowels and the consonants, and to create textures, which I thought was very fitting, and that the words fit very well to his idea of sound. if that makes sense.
Wow.
I'm getting
Yeah,
very
that's super
philosophical about
cool.
poetry.
No, of course, I love it. I mean, I've written poetry before for nobody to see but me, but I would imagine that it would be tempting to kind of alter the way I was writing if I knew that somebody was gonna set it. I don't know.
Really?
But staying true to the words is obviously the most important thing. Was there anything you had to explain to him about the operatic voice as you were learning the music? Is there anything that you like needed to help him understand, or was he
Not
pretty experienced
really.
with writing? Yeah.
Yeah, most of the people I have worked with, well, not most of them, but the people that I've worked closely with, they generally know
Hmm.
something about the voice, and if they have a question about it, they're just going to ask. They're not going to go ahead and set something and then just say you have to do it like this. Um,
Right.
and I have a lot of respect for that too, because I always try. I'm never going to go into a rehearsal and say to someone, "Oh, this is not possible." Which is like the singer's side of it. It's always like, okay, tell me what sound you want. I don't know how to make it yet, but we can find a way to make it. Um, that's usually either the composer realizes that the sound is not possible,
Hmm.
or you find a way to make whatever sound it is, maybe not the way that that composer wants you to make it, but you can find a way in your personal technique to make that sound. And so my approach to them, whereas their approach to me is usually asking, is this an acceptable way to set these words? Is this like a good register? Like
Hmm.
questions about what works and what doesn't for the text and the
Right.
voice.
I have to say, I commend you on that diplomatic approach, because there are a lot of singers that would not be so kind as to say nothing is impossible. Even, something like aggressive singing. A lot of singers like, no, absolutely not. I cannot do that. But you find a way to make it work based on
Well,
the
I
kind of
mean,
sound that they're wanting to
yeah, sometimes they say they want aggressive singing. I mean, that's a whole different topic. But it's not really that they want that technique, it's that they want what sounds like aggressive singing. And there are lots of ways you can make that same sound without actually inhaling and phonating, if that makes sense.
Right.
So
Yes. Well, actually, I have no idea, because this is something, I mean, this is just, I started my first quarter here, and I've done a lot of contemporary opera, but that
yeah.
kind of hold the same, grand opera traditions. So I haven't done a lot of experimental stuff with my voice. And actually, this past weekend was the first time I had attempted to do that. And
Cool.
I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, I thought, okay, I'm phonating on an inhale. Like, how hard can this be? And then I got really vocally tired and had to get the singers to like give me different techniques on how to do that without getting fatigued. So I never
Yeah.
thought to alter it. I don't know, like getting the same sound but in a completely different technical way. It never even occurred to me that that was a
Well, I mean,
possibility.
yeah, like first of all, a lot of composers don't actually understand vocal technique when they think they
Yeah.
do. I mean, I'm not trying to be like condescending or anything, but it's just the truth. We've studied vocal technique for who knows how many years at this point, so we really know the voice. And
Yeah.
we know how to produce all of these sounds, and sometimes you just need to ask the composer or like give them a range of sounds that you can make, and then they'll say, oh wait, that's the sound that I want. How do we isolate that and
Right.
integrate it here? And then you can find a way to do it like what's healthy for you and your voice.
Right.
Sometimes it's not at all healthy, like, screaming. I mean, there are ways to fake screaming, but there are some
Yeah.
sounds that you're like, look, if you want this, I'm going to do it once. Maybe I'm going to do it at the dress rehearsal, but I'm going to do it like during the concert, and that's it. Um, and you can survive, doing that, but
Right.
you get to know your voice as you
Yeah.
do more of this stuff.
Yeah.
But I will say
Well,
one more thing about
that's
ingressive
something.
singing, though. If you want to talk about ingressive
Uh-huh.
singing, I have one more thing to share, and it was that
Please.
in the fall, this was very surprising to me. I was singing with a quartet in Augsburg, Germany, and one of the singers, a Belgian guy who lives in Vienna, he is a
Uh-huh.
wonderful singer. And he is not a new music singer. He sings mostly like Renaissance, Renaissance romantic, classical, like all of the kind of normal singing stuff. And he said for years he's been doing his vocal warm-ups on ingressive singing because his classical opera teacher taught him that that's healthy for your voice. And he had practiced this like every day when he warmed up. He would do these ingressive technique, these warm-ups, and he was showing them to me. I was like, I've never ever heard of a classical singer who does this, first of all, as a warm-up, like to actually warm up your
Right.
voice phonation, and can do it healthfully, can do it for a long time, and believes that it's fine for the voice. I mean, that is also showing me like a whole new side to ingressive singing.
Wow.
So it is possible. It's much
I
more
mean, it's
possible.
always been discouraged.
Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
It makes me have a little hope that I can learn how to begin to try to do it.
You definitely can.
So
Don't
as
worry.
far as like, what's that?
You can definitely learn how to do it. Don't worry.
Yeah, I'm working on it. That's amazing though. I've never heard of any classically trained singer incorporating that into their practice of producing a healthy sound. That's
Super
really
interesting.
okay. Yeah, I could get on board with that. So as far as like medieval music or classical music versus contemporary music on a very general level, what do you think are the ingredients that are like essential to keeping the art form living and breathing versus like which ones do you think are outdated? And just in your humble opinion.
What I don't, you mean like what vocal technique or like what music or what do you mean?
Yeah, we can start with definitely vocal technique because I know a lot of people. I mean, we have to distinguish first of all between like abstract theater and opera. So let's just talk about music that's classified as contemporary opera. So, you know, a lot of people are under the opinion that the unamplified voice is an essential ingredient to a genre that you're going to call opera. So we can just like isolate the voice. What are your thoughts on that? Because I know you do a lot of electronic music and things like that. Just as far as reimagining opera is concerned, because that was a rather broad question. What elements of the voice do you think are essential to stay true to the art form?
Well, I have to admit that I really believe in singers developing like a very good classical technique, that you can
Mm-hmm.
always pick up a Schubert song or you can pick up an aria that fits your voice and you can sing it at any point. So, I mean, it's absolutely
Right.
essential to learn how to breathe, to learn how to move and sing. It's essential to learn how to sing on pitch and to learn rhythm and things like that. So, I really believe that a classical training is necessary to like create this foundation where you can go to any kind of music or any kind of crazy technique. So like if you have a good technique, you can generally go back and sing early music, medieval music, and Renaissance music, which requires a lot of control for pitch, and a lot of
Mhm.
kind of like thinking, especially if you have to read difficult music like Nooms, which I had to like sight read earlier this year. Not my favorite thing.
Oh,
um,
goodness.
but then like amplified, yeah. I mean, sometimes it's part of the aesthetic to amplify the voice, and I get that.
Mhm.
Or sometimes
Yeah.
you want to mix it. Like for instance, there's the piece that I sang with Ictus in Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
A piece that takes like 5 blues songs and then creates like this whole new setting for them with just intonation and like a huge band. And I was like slightly amplified for that piece, but it was mostly because I needed to mix with the ensemble. And
Right.
in that case, like it wasn't that I was amplified because you couldn't hear me, although that did help with, I mean, mixing me in well did help with hearing me, because that kind
Mm-hmm.
of style is, you can't use the classical techniques. You cannot get like the spectral series that carries over such a large ensemble or such a loud ensemble.
Right.
So that helped a lot with being able to understand me and to hear me, but also to mix in a good balance with the ensemble. But just to like amplify an untrained voice, I mean, yeah, I don't know. If we're talking about untrained voices, like that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Um, I'll tell one story, and that is that when I was singing with the Vocal Lab, we had this composer come in, and she had this piece written for us, and it was a difficult piece, but we could sing everything except for this one sound that no one could make. It was like this crazy, like pterodactyl, multiphonic thing, like, and only this composer could make this sound. And it was because she had an untrained voice. Like what she was doing sounded extremely painful. And we all tried to make it.
Right.
We could all make like certain multiphonic sounds, but so sometimes with untrained voices, you can get sounds that maybe trained voices have like trained out of them
Right.
in a way, but that's very unusual. And like in that case, we just recorded her making that sound and then like hit play when we were supposed to make it.
Right.
So great. And then it
That
was
is
like we
really
used it like
interesting.
as a joke. Like it was our call to come on stage for the concert, like this. And then anyway, so
Well, that's actually really interesting because that's something that we experienced this past weekend. There was two of the singers were doing a project where the composer had written this piece while they were singing and they were tied together. And
mhm.
what she wanted to do is explore different aspects of the voice when something is happening, like they're being pulled by their arm or pulled by their leg with the other singer. But these singers are so classically trained that they've learned to not have their voices be affected by anything
Yeah.
that's going on physically
Yeah.
except for being hit in the throat. So we're all like in this room together trying to figure out, well, what kind of sound do you want? And she's like, well, I want it to be something really raw, something that's just they're affected because their body's moving. And we're like, our whole like training has been to make sure that that doesn't happen. And even we were surprised by all of the jerky movements and all the things that were happening. So we had to really explore. The singers were like, well, maybe if you had us running for 10 minutes straight, and then we experimented with that sound, maybe that would be something, or lying in a different position. But it's really interesting the kinds of things that we aren't capable of because we are trained. Like
Yeah.
there are limitations that we have because we can't unlearn how to protect our voice, for example, when things are happening physically and we're moving
Yeah.
so much on stage.
Yeah.
So that's a fantastic story because we all just experienced this the past weekend and we were all really surprised, like, I'm too trained to do this like project. And so you have to keep that in mind when you've got trained singers at your disposal, that there are certain things that we just can't unlearn.
Yeah. And
That
that would
is
be like
one of the
another,
things. We
that would
can't
be like
fake
a,
it.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, like that would be a case where like the best you can do is then say to the composer, let's try and figure out how to make the sound that you want and
Right.
go from there.
But her whole project was that that sound would be, she wanted the organically produced sound from an outside element, like being pulled by a rope. kind of thing. And there was just almost no difference when they were singing still versus when they were singing being jerked around by, being tied by the hands and feet. So it was really interesting. I was really surprised too. I mean, I thought for sure like something weird and guttural and strange and interesting would happen, but they were just so damn trained that she was not getting this like visceral quality that she was hoping for. So I have to ask you this is a really hard question. Are you ready for this?
Okay.
What are the distinctions between opera and abstract musical theater? I mean, obviously there's similarities and differences, but how do you distinguish between those two? Or can you? Or is it like becoming just one genre?
From my experience, it's basically one genre. I mean, unless an opera company wants to call it an opera or someone wants to call it an opera, there's really no reason to put limitations on what an opera can be. And most of the things that I do that involve staging, costumes, whatever, are music theater, not musical theater, but music theater. If any kind of music is involved, then it's music theater. But that could just be like, yeah, I don't know. In Europe, where I live, it's just not such a big thing anymore to try and distinguish between them. I think in the US, it's a much bigger deal because like you have all of these ensembles that are called like opera companies, like small opera companies throughout the US, and they want to like figure out where their line is. I think that's a very conservative way to think about it, and it's also just like a cultural thing. Here, it's just not such a big deal. Opera houses do things that are more like in the direction of music theater. For instance, like a piece that the Stuttgart Opera did, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 5 years ago, was a piece called, oh, I can't remember what it's called, but I know that there were no words in it. It was just singers singing vowels, and it was telling a story from the Holocaust. And that was at like the main opera house, and no one's really concerned about whether that's an opera or whether that's like a concert piece or whether that's like theater with music or like what exactly that is. It's more like if there's staging, then it's basically new music theater. But I mean, I don't really make any distinction between them at all, and it really depends on what the production is.
Right. I guess storytelling is the commonality between all of those subgenres.
It's not, but it's not. There's not always storytelling going on.
Yeah. Right.
Like sometimes it's so abstract that there's not really a story. It's more like a mood or an atmosphere or I don't really know. It could be totally undefined, but you could still get the feeling that it's music theater.
Right.
My opinion.
Human experience might be better. Yeah, even storytelling is such a specific thing.
Yeah. I mean, like the big thing for me is like if there's staging, then it's music theater. Staging with music, then it's music theater. Could be opera, could be a lot of things.
But it definitely becomes theater when there's staging involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just see it as like very fluid.
Yeah.
From my experience.
So you have done so much. Again, do you have like an idea of where like the operatic form is heading? Like, do you see things that are remaining constant and that are being incorporated What do you think is going to change in the operatic form?
I mean, I've done a lot of music theater pieces, so I don't know if I could call it like operatic form in any way. But I think something that's very distinct in our time is the voice of the composer. So,
Yeah.
it's not like in Mozart's time with Salieri and Mozart, they're both writing numbers operas, or you're going back to the Romantic time. There are just certain rules that everybody follows about opera. I mean, that's just not the case at all in any way.
Right.
It really
Right.
has to do with the vision of the composer. It has to do with like who they've engaged to sing in this. I mean, if they've engaged a larger ensemble or smaller, or an institution, or sometimes just instrumental ensembles will put on music theater pieces. I've seen some things like that. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on that could be labeled music theater. And
Yeah.
from my point of view, it really has to do with the vision of the composer coming through. And that's even more important. Well, it's even more important than the director in most music theater. But now in the opera world, the director is like king for old operas.
Right.
Old operas.
Right.
So
That's a really, really good point. I've never noticed that, but that's totally true.
yeah, it's like
Wow.
no longer, it's not really anymore about realizing the vision of the composer or the librettist, although some people will pay lip service to that. It's mostly about like, oh, look at my new way of interpreting Così fan tutte, or Madame Butterfly, or Macbeth, or whatever. It's all
Right.
about like this external vision being imposed on the piece. I mean, what's
Yeah.
difficult as a singer when you're in these things is like being true to yourself in these
Right.
situations.
Like,
You
you
know,
mean having your own voice
yeah,
within
like
the composer's voice is
yeah, exactly. Like getting up on stage and feeling like, okay, like I believe in what I'm doing. I mean, that doesn't always have to be the case, but like feeling confident in what you're doing, being your own voice as best you can, and
hmm
not letting someone else's vision completely dominate you, or just that you feel like a puppet or something.
right.
Because
That's
that
a
can
hard
get
thing to
very tiring.
negotiate.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very difficult.
Because you don't just want to be a vessel or a
Yeah,
paintbrush, but
yeah.
you want to respect and do justice to, yeah, the composer's voice, but also
Hmm.
maintaining your own at the same time. That is a really hard thing to
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
It's
Because if you just
much
like,
easier to do in, I was going to say it's much easier to do in old operas where you can reimagine something over and over and over and over again. But when it's like a living, breathing thing that already has its own voice, like superimposing another voice on top of that is really tricky. It's limiting. It's
yeah,
weird to think that doing new music would be more limiting than doing old, you know, traditional
yeah.
rap.
Sometimes it is. I mean, there are limiting
Yeah.
factors to doing both things, but when you
Yeah,
have
sure.
the composer sitting in front of you, then sometimes you are really limited. And
Yeah.
and then like maybe someday you'll get to do the piece where the composer's not there, or like you've done the piece many times and you just don't care anymore, and then like you do it the way you want to. I mean, that doesn't always happen, but there's some pieces like that where you're like, okay,
Yeah.
now it's time for me to show you what I think this piece is about. Because sometimes
Right.
composers don't even get what their piece is about. um, like a lot of composers write intuitively, and
Yeah.
then you're just like, okay. I mean, I have to admit, I had this. I'm like just going off on tangents all over the place, but
No, I love it.
there's this piece by Helmut Lachenmann, called "Got Lost." Do you know it?
Mm-mm.
So Lachenmann's this German composer, and he is very interested in like noises and like the noises that you try to eliminate from your technique so that it sounds perfect. He incorporates those into the actual singing or performing on whatever
Mm-hmm.
instrument. And he wants everything to be emotionless. And he has this amazing piano voice piece. And like I've worked with someone who's a protege of him. So he just kept telling me like take emotion out of it, take emotion out of it and just make it very dry.
Ooh,
And so in front
yeah.
of him, I did like this very dry stuff, but in the end I was like this piece is so emotional. Like there are so many levels to it. And I was sang it for my teacher several times and I would sing it without the emotion and then I would sing it with more of like depth to it, and
Uh-huh.
everyone who heard the version that had more emotion was very moved by the piece, even though they had heard the piece several times in other versions by other singers. And I think that Lachenmann just didn't really realize like the depth of the composition, that if you
Right.
let people kind of invest themselves in the piece, uh, that you can create all of these different versions of the piece based on each individual who sings it and their own emotional temperature, their own voice, like what they can bring out in the color, things that he had been avoiding because he was like, oh, it has to be like dry and emotionless, and that's where the emotion comes from. But I don't
Right.
know. So that kind of thing can happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, that's how you make your mark as a performing artist is,
Mm-hmm.
what do you have to offer? What are your experiences that enrich these pieces versus other people's experiences that can enrich this piece? It's like seeing someone play Figaro on stage. It's, Figaro's experiences and, John's experiences that makes that character so interesting. It's not just their interpretation of this imaginary figure. It's like
Yeah.
they're themselves,
Yeah,
their
I mean
selves.
that's like why we go and that's why we go and see like all of these people perform the same pieces over and over again. Because like we want to hear how Ian Bostridge sings Vintoriza, or like we want to hear
Yeah.
how Luca Pissaroni sings Leporello, or like that person's like individual personality put together with that piece is like there's something
Right.
really interesting about it.
Completely taking emotion out of something seems more like an experiment than like an actual product. Because, I mean, do you think that that's even possible? I mean, you would have to be a robot, right, to succeed at doing that?
Well, I'll tell you, Ashley, you're going to be asked to do that so many times because many composers just hate emotion. They think
Why do you think
that
that is?
it's because they are afraid of sounding, I mean, in my opinion, they're afraid of sounding like too classical, or um
Ah,
like if they let you use like the full power of your classical training, the full power of your voice, then it's like just associated with old people like Puccini and Verdi,
right.
and they want a new voice, and like creating whatever feels like or sounds like no emotion to them is then more powerful than actually being emotional. I mean, there are some pieces like um do you know David Lang, composer David Lang?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you probably know the Little Magical Passion. You know that piece?
Mm-hmm.
I've
Yeah.
sang that piece like I've sung that piece several times, and um, I think what he's getting at is like this very naive sound, like very straight tone, naive, kind of robotic sound. And in a
Mm-hmm.
way that sound like the singers in combination with each other and in combination with these kind of like very dry percussion instruments, most of them are very dry. um, you get you do get like a very highly emotional moment. um, I mean, I hope David Lang doesn't watch this. I do not enjoy singing that piece because it is so tiring for the voice, but I know that
Yeah,
it's a powerful, powerful piece for the audience.
right.
So there are some
Because it's so
pieces like that.
exposed.
Yeah, it's so
Yeah.
exposed. Exactly. It's so exposed. Like you have, I mean, for the soprano, you have these oscillating, like semi repeating things in your chest voice for a while. And then the next movement is just like up on an F,
Hmm.
repeating words over and over and over again. And
Right.
like, just, after I even rehearse that piece, I'm always just like dead. Like I can't talk to anybody because my voice is just so tired. But I know that
Mhm.
the listeners really have a very moving experience from
Right.
from what I've heard.
I can see how a composer who doesn't have experience being a singer would kind of associate emotions with artificiality just because
Yeah,
of the stigma of the opera singer being so dramatic and, overacting.
yeah.
I can see how that can translate into something being artificial.
Hmm.
Um, but is there something like, is that an element that you kind of miss, like being able to just emote? Like, is that something that you wish that you could do more, you had more permission to do?
I mean, it depends on the situation. And like sometimes things that are, like I said, sometimes things that are like very artificial they can bring out an emotion. But there are times when
Mm-hmm.
I'm just like, I just think that composers don't necessarily understand what would happen if you allowed the singer to fully invest their voice and their body in the piece. Because you get so many pieces that are like, oh no, no, I want that like non vibrato in this high
Mm-hmm.
register, like this very light color. Um, and that can just get so boring and tiring. And I think they're being like non-emotional to be they're like it's like this paradox, right? Because it's very artificial what they're doing to the voice, but they think what they're doing is like very natural for the voice. They think that like
Right.
singing with no vibrato or whatever is very natural. um and for us it's not. I mean, for
Right.
trained singers
Right.
it's not.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's hard because, you know, I do yoga to figure out how my body is naturally supposed to move, right? When I was a baby, I was super flexible. I didn't have to think about it. And I formed all these really unnatural habits. So by doing yoga, which seems like something really unnatural when people see these, crazy positions, is actually getting back to your natural state when you're a baby and you're putting your foot, in your mouth. So
yeah,
yeah, it's, singing without vibrato might seem like that's the natural thing, but it's really just like the stressed out human response of like life that is taken the vibrato out of, a voice. So like a trained classical singer is really going back to like what your voice naturally wants to do when it is healthy and rested and not stressed out. But that's
yeah.
kind of a hard thing to believe when you see yogis in these crazy poses. You're like, that ain't natural, but really, it really is. You're like training to be in like your natural state again. I don't know. It's probably a terrible analogy, but
Not at all.
I
No,
can,
that's exactly the same. I think it's exactly the same.
yeah, I can see how composers would think a no vibrato, naked, straight tone, mousy, airy sound would be like getting back to nature, but really that's just getting back to like a stressed adult sound.
Exactly.
Not really. I mean, that's like such a broad way of thinking about it. I mean, like
Yeah.
a piano straight tone sound has so many different connotations. It depends on the piece and everything else. And I don't mind doing it, but I think there is a lot of hesitation letting singers use the full scope of their sound. I haven't quite figured out what is so scary about that yet. I think your point about the composer wanting to have a voice might be a really big part of it. The artificiality dynamic. But yeah, it's interesting that's kind of a scary, that's a risk almost.
Yeah.
Composers
Yeah,
now.
it
It's
is.
more
And like, yeah, and they just don't want to sound like they are, I don't know, out of touch with contemporary music. So if they
right.
use like the natural sounding voice, then they sound very conservative.
Yeah.
There's just like that assumption that they're conservative. Oh, they just want to write like the old guys. They just want to write tonal music or whatever. And we need to like help them break out of that.
Right. Break out of the pressure to not write tonal music.
No, break out
silly,
of the pressure, but break out of the pressure to like avoid the natural sound of the trained voice, you know? That they can feel
natural sound
free.
of the trained voice. Yeah. That is perfectly put. I love that. I'm gonna have to write that one down because that's exactly what I was trying to say with my really chaotic analogy.
No, it was great.
Is there any parting words, anything that you want to tell the world before you and I have to figure out how to get my Skype working because I just want to like friend talk now at this point.
Yeah,
but is there anything else like super important you need to tell the world before we depart?
I don't think
No pressure.
so. I was very honored for you to interview me for this, so thank you so much.
No, it's so fantastic that you were willing to do this. This was awesome. I really thought it was important to interview a singer when having a project like this. It's, we don't want our voices to get lost either, as silly as that sounds.
No, not at all. And we have contact with a lot of different composers and a lot of different like projects that can really add to the conversation. So
yeah, definitely.
Because composers have like their own work that they're promoting and their own just like idea about music, but we are engaged with we're engaged with so many different styles and so many different composers that we just kind of like can like look at it from a different perspective.
Right. Because we've got our hands in all of it. Yeah. Gross mental picture. Well, thank you so much. You're amazing, and I want to talk to you more, but we'll stop this video for now because But we'll talk soon, and thank you so much. It was so
my
awesome.
Pleasure. Hope to talk to you soon, Ashley.
Good luck with everything. You definitely will. I will. I refuse to lose touch with you.
Good. Looking forward to it.
All right. Well, have a fantastic day. We'll talk soon.
Okay. Talk to you soon.
Thank you
Bye.
again. Bye.